The new HR-V is entirely different from its predecessor, not just physically, but philosophically too. And as a result, I think this might be the new benchmark of the segment. If you enjoy fun, detailed car content without fluff, consider subscribing and hitting the bell for notifications. Leading the changes for 2023 is a new platform. It now rides on the Honda global architecture, so it's no longer underpinned by the platform of the now late Honda Fit. Underneath, it's much more closely related now to the Honda Civic. Honda keeps the trims and packaging quite simple for the HR-V. You have the LX, the Sport, and the EXL, the latter of which is sitting right next to me. The easiest way to tell them apart is that the EXL is the only trim to get this gloss black look. Other cars will get more standard body cladding, and you can tell the Sport apart from the base by the grille. They also offer a HPD package and a rugged package that really doesn't change anything mechanically, and there's no taking this thing off-road. At 7 inches of ground clearance, 7.3 with the Sport due to the wheels, I believe, you're going to be limited to pretty tame activities, and that goes for almost all of its competitors too. Where this doesn't lack is in premium features, like standard LED headlights, and the LED daytime running lights are also standard too. On top of that, all of them will have a high beam assist, with the XL getting parking sensors as well, making it easier to maneuver the HR-V's big forehead. That hood and the design overall do help this look more upscale than any of its competitors, in my opinion. But this is all subjective, so let me know your thoughts in the comment section. But the one thing that is a fact about these looks is the uncanny resemblance to the old Ford Fusion. Under the hood, you have a 2-liter naturally aspirated inline-4, technically a K20 engine, which, I mean, gosh, those things have been out for over 20 years now. This one has direct injection. It just has VTEC on the intake valves there, so you don't get this dramatic switch over at the higher RPMs. It performs its duties as a subcompact SUV just fine. The bigger issue is that peak power is made 6,800 RPM, and the numbers there just are kind of lacking. 158 horsepower, and more importantly, just 138 pound-feet of torque. Gas mileage is rated a little below par, but I was easily getting over 30 on the highway with all-wheel drive. Plus, no auto stop start, but yes, this comes paired exclusively to a continuously variable transmission. But before you comment on how CVTs have bullied you since the 7th grade, remember not only the purpose of the HR-V, but that Honda CVTs are quite reliable, which I'll talk more about later. But that doesn't mean that every CVT complaint is fixed. It does try to mimic gears there to make it feel more natural, but all it's really doing is making itself operate a little bit less efficiently. One of the bigger takeaways is that this is very honest about its power. So if you get into, say a car like the Subaru Crosstrek, I'm going to compare it to that a lot because I have a lot of experience with it. If you compare it to the Crosstrek, this feels a lot slower in normal day-to-day scenarios because the Crosstrek is tuned to where if you just give it like, half or just a quarter throttle, the CVT responds and it makes it feel like it's got a lot more power than it really does. This doesn't really do that. So the result is something that feels more smooth and linear, but also you have to give it more gas in order to really get it to go, especially if you're just having it in the regular drive mode. You can put it into a sports mode. You don't have paddle shifters, which honestly, thank you Honda. It's a CVT. I don't need them. I don't want them really. That does make it a little bit more responsive, and it does kind of make it feel like it has more pep in its step. But now I want to find out what the actual performance is through a quick 0 to 60 test. I will just shut off the AC, turn off the traction control, and well, see what we get. Seconds to 60. It needs to get to the high RPMs in order to actually take off, and it just takes too long to get there, and that definitely puts it on the slower side of the segment, although I should say that it is a humid day, it's hot out, so this should be able to make it in the 9s on a more mild day. Still, that's not what this type of car is about. Transmission responds in a smooth, relaxed manner, leading to adequate thrust from highway speeds. While not particularly refined, I feel that a solid majority of actual people shopping in this segment will find this to have an appropriate powertrain. But if Honda wants to get swifty with an SI version to go against the Kona N, I think this platform would do nicely. Around the side of the HRV where you really notice that this thing grew, mainly in the 9.4 inches of added length over the previous car. Except one thing I want to point out, the cargo area is actually a touch smaller, but specifically only by a slight margin when the seats are folded. Which is less of a knock on this car, but more of a testament on how well packaged the previous model was. When it comes to features, you'll have proximity unlock and lock standard on the Sport spec. Another thing I should add is that Honda really doesn't offer any features in packages. So if you want more tech or convenience, you just have to step up a whole trim, which does make things easier when shopping in today's limited market. At least there's not much of a penalty if you have to go with one of the lower trims, as you still get 17-inch alloys there. Here we have a different set of 17-inch alloys, whereas the Sport rides on 18s and easily distinguishable by its pronounced exhaust exit. Base cars still will have body color painted door handles and mirror caps, along with the little spoiler. When it comes to the all-wheel drive system, we'll have Honda's real-time all-wheel drive, not the VTM system of the Honda Pilot and Honda Ridgeline. The downside to this is that it will at max just send, I believe, 50% of torque to the rear, usually kind of unimpressive at shuffling power side to side. I think it was Driving Sports TV did a great test with this thing, albeit a brief one because it just can't make it very far. This does have 3 drive modes, normal, economy, and snow, but these only play with the throttle mapping and transmission ratios to optimize traction, efficiency, and 2-liter guts. Like most others in the class, the all-wheel drive option is to give you confidence in snowy parking lots, not remote camping spots. If that's something that you're going to do, I would just recommend going with a Subaru Crosstrek. And at 65 miles per hour, I found this thing to cruise usually in the low 2000 RPMs. It kind of doesn't stick to a particular place just because it's constantly changing its ratios. And when you're on the highway, its ride is smooth, controlled, and a little noisy. I would not consider this a quiet car for the class. It's just not offensively loud. The HRV has an overtly present wow factor on the interior. Of course, this is relative speaking, but here, at still less than $31,000, this looks upscale. The lines in here are very smooth and clean. The tech is not overbearing. They also make sure to use in almost every place at least somewhat soft materials. And where you actually come in contact with is quite plush. You have very nice rest points for your knees, something that I like about the Mazda CX-30, but what this has over that car is also better visibility. It feels more open and airy in here. It doesn't have as low a belt line as something like a Subaru Crosstrek, but it is a little bit more approachable than the Mazda, and it only sacrifices just a little bit of the premium touches of that car. Really, they just put soft leather on practically every point that they could. And the Mazda, and I think with the nicer finished speaker grills and some of the accents, it looks a little bit more expensive. For me though, this and the Mazda sit pretty far away from the others in terms of interior refinement and luxury. What I like most about this is that it's premium yet still easy to interact with. And a lot of that comes down to the standard tech. You'll have a 7-inch display on the base and Sport, and that's going to have more physical buttons surrounding it. It'll have a volume and tune dial, whereas this just gets the volume knob. And those lower trim models will still have a 7-inch virtual gauge cluster that is very well integrated, not super customizable, but its half cluster design leaves room for the lovely classic Honda looking analog speedometer. Very quick and snappy to use while you're in motion, and I really do like the controls that they give you on the steering wheel, and Honda has enough attention to detail to use the gloss black plastic here to make it look nice in the areas that you're really not going to be touching, and the buttons still remain in a matte finish. I want to talk about this 9-inch touchscreen that you'll get with the EXL. I think it's one of the better UIs offered in mainstream brands. They'll have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto standard, but the EXL is the only one to get it wireless. Resolution is good. You have very deep blacks. You have quick response time. But what I'm more enamored with is how well Honda does clickiness. These HVAC controls are so satisfying. And you'll have automatic climate control on every car, and it becomes dual zone on the EXL. Really, the only complaint I have with this setup is that when you're driving, the heated seat button is perfectly hidden by the steering wheel. But I'm definitely nitpicking there. storage in here is great too. They have this kind of little bridge set up here with grippy material, so you can put your phone or various objects in here and it won't slide around. You also have decent sized cubbies in each door panel. None of the cup holders in here will fit a 40-ounce hydro flask, and the front cubby up here is taken up by a wireless charger in the top spec model. One thing I do like, you have 3 USB ports up front. Hands down, my biggest complaint with the interior of the HR-V are the seats. And this is not a new complaint for Honda as a brand. So to start off, you have firm seats, kind of like you would find in an Audi, but they're not shaped as well. And it has this kind of like weird grade there on the seat bottom that just allows me to never really get in a super comfortable position. And most of my passengers have said something similar. Plus, for such a nice interior, I would have really liked to see lumbar adjustment, at least on the top trim model, which is a common thing missing in this class. Regardless, the seats don't leave me in pain on longer journeys. Compared to some competitors, this is a bit light on features. No heads-up display, ventilated seats, heated steering wheel, or built-in navigation, if that's a thing people still care about. However, considering the price, I'd personally take this quality over those features, but it might be nice to see a touring trim in the future. The Sport will get cloth seats with contrast stitching and heated front seats. So you'll have 4 speakers standard, add tweeters in the front for the Sport trim, and then 2 more for the EXL. All have just 180 watts, there's no subwoofer, and yeah, the lack of power and bass is noticeable, but at least here it does have a decent surround sound feeling, so it doesn't leave me with this innate urge to upgrade the speaker system, but a little more juice would have been nice. Additionally, since Honda doesn't really offer packaging, you can't opt for the sunroof. It just comes standard, but only on the EXL. I know it sounds like I've been complaining here, but really I am impressed by this interior and its size too. I have good hip room, plenty of headroom, and I'm 6'3". With the front seat set for a comfortable yet not excessive position for myself, I have about 1 inch of clearance for my knees, about 1 inch for my head, and just enough thigh support to keep me happy. The high points include still a soft place to rest your elbow and a pretty flat floor back here, so you can use all 3 seats here. Granted, if the middle person is rather narrow. I am disappointed though to not see any HVAC vents, chargers, USB ports, or any of that in the back seat here, or even an armrest, but you do have nice lights. Yes. Really, the interior lighting as a whole at night is kind of neat. Honda was still working at a price point, and I think they just hit the right points that people care about the most. Having something that, you know, looks fresh, feels fresh, intuitively laid out, and has enough space for a small family or vacation. And I think this combines all of those things better than any other car in the class. The cargo area of the HR-V is very competitive for the class. It's a wide area, it has a low lift-over height, and you can fold the seats down flat, all while still retaining independent rear suspension and a spare tire, leading me to believe that if you're in search of one of the more practical cars in the segment, this will do the job. The only downside here, again, is that you just don't have the same clever fuel tank packaging that helped us have just an insane amount of cargo space in the past. Plus, the Magic seats are gone too, so you can't lift up the rear seat bottoms to accommodate some really tall items in the back seat. It does take away some of the uniqueness that the previous HR-V had. Where this begins to shine is on a back road like this. Not only with its composed ride, but also with the great steering. I mean, I'm actually enjoying my time out here. The HR-V is surprisingly poised and feels like Hondas of old, but I want to talk about comfort first, because if that's probably what you're going to prioritize here. And it does absorb these bumps in a pretty good way. It's just still on the firm side. If you're looking for a more posh ride, I think that something like a Subaru Crosstrek is going to do a better job of keeping the cabin unbothered on even the most appalling of roads. The Honda just has more character while still providing a forgiving ride, and it stays sure of itself around corners with broken pavement. If you live in a city with terrible roads, or sometimes unpaved roads, this isn't the best car in the segment, but for most of you, it'll handle what you got with ease. The bigger appeal is how natural the steering feels. It really feels like an older Honda. The weighting is pretty light, but it has a quick ratio, and it seems like they've done a good job at, you know, keeping the on-center feel tight, yet not darty. The only car that I think I would rather have on a back road is probably the Mazda CX-30, but really just for the subjective stuff, because I like the heavier steering. Ultimately though, I think it's very much a toss-up. This is really a playful little SUV. And once you're up to speed, the powertrain becomes less of a problem, especially when you're in the sport mode. It begins to have more of an urgency to it, and that pairs nicely to the precision of the HR-V. It's an enjoyable experience around town too. I can just kind of place this thing exactly where I want. I think that once again, the Subaru Crosstrek does a better job really just at handling overall and comfort. It's I think just a better composed vehicle, has a lower center of gravity, feels more capable than this, just nowhere near as fun and as engaging. And that good visibility for a premium feeling interior that I was talking about earlier, combined with the playful steering, makes for just a enjoyable, almost nostalgic experience. Part of that I think is because like the windshield feels very close to me. This has a longer hood versus a longer dashboard, and that also helps with maintenance. Getting to things around the engine bay seems like an easier job. And since the engine and transmission have a good reputation, this should be trusty. I'd just keep an eye on direct injection carbon buildup and make sure to change the trans fluid every 40,000 miles or so. Honda recommends 25 if you drive in mountainous areas regularly. I can only speculate now, but I predict reliability to be a little better than average if I'm basing it off of the 10th gen Civic, whose biggest vices include bad AC compressors, evaporators, power steering, and infotainment bugs with that old setup. The 1.5 turbo does have reports of oil dilution, which is why I'm happy to see the K20 in the HR-V. When it comes to safety equipment, you will have Honda's latest version. It doubles the field of vision of the previous system, allowing for it to see pedestrians, vehicles, animals, whatever, easier. And while I haven't had any close calls in that kind of way, I have used the lane keep assist quite a bit. You still have to keep a hand on the steering wheel at all times, but driving this on the highway is an easy task. And if you want blind spot monitoring and rear cross traffic alert, that'll come standard on the sport trim. Whenever I first saw the HR-V, I thought, man, this has the potential to just dominate every car in the class because of how premium the interior looks and the platform that underpins the car. And in a lot of ways, I really would consider this right there at the top of the class. But their budget does shine through in certain areas. I think that Honda just chose the right ones to cheap out in. They chose quality materials, panel fitment, and analog controls over added features. They chose a simple engine over a fast, hyper-efficient one, and fun, easygoing handling over an isolated ride. For the money, this excels in crucial areas without the deal-breaking flaws of some others in the class. For instance, I would still call the Mazda CX-30 my personal favorite of the class for the engine, sound system, and slight edge in luxury, but I can acknowledge that the HR-V is better for more of its audience because of practicality and visibility alone. While it is important, what separates the great from the best is often not who has the strongest attributes. Cars these days are usually so good that each has a compelling argument for itself, so there's no clear winner. Who gets the unofficial crown comes down to the Achilles. If you're okay with slower than average acceleration, limited off-road capability, and odd seats, the HR-V is damn hard to beat. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the review, leave a like to help me strike a blow on the YouTube algorithm. If you want to see more, subscribe and hit the bell for notifications. And thank you to my loyal Patreons. I'll catch you in the next one.